president of the Ridgewood Art Institute. We are so excited to have Max Ginsburg with us tonight. Before I introduce our very special guest, I'd like to recognize several people who made this evening possible. First and foremost, Beth Ravit, who unbelievably, she not only organized the program, but she also was instrumental in securing the grant for tonight from the Bergen County Division of Cultural and Historic Affairs. I also want to thank Kathy Wu Brady and also Matthew Franskin, who, for their technical support. With their expertise, we're making this possible. We're also live streaming it for the first time. And that's a really big deal for us because we could reach a larger audience, and it's very exciting. And also, there are a lot of volunteers that make this place happen. We're a nonprofit, completely volunteer, and the same people and a large group of people stand up over and over and donate their time. And so we really are very, very, very thankful. Now, it's my honor and privilege to introduce you a truly remarkable individual whose work has left an indelible mark on the world of art and storytelling. Max Ginsburg is not just a painter. He is a master of realism, a storyteller of the human condition, and a passionate advocate for truth and social justice through art. His work captures the raw, unfiltered essence of life, portraying everyday people and moments with depth and authenticity that resonates deeply with all that get to experience it. Over the course of his illustrious career, Max has exhibited his work in prestigious galleries and museums worldwide, earning countless accolades and inspiring generations of artists. His dedication to his craft is only matched by his commitment to teaching. You were teaching today before coming, correct?
Yes.
That's amazing. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. Really, his students have benefited through the years. He's also, I just want to mention, has taught painting and drawing at the High School of Art and Design, the School of Visual Arts, and currently teaching at the Art Students League. It's been said that Max's paintings speak volumes without uttering a single word. Tonight, we're fortunate to have both. First, a brief presentation, and then his painting a model. Michelle, thank you for being here. We will take a brief break in between the presentation and the painting, so you could help yourself to some refreshments at that time and mill around, and please enjoy all of the instructors' paintings. This actual exhibit will be on until October 28th, so if you don't have a chance to really study them tonight, please come back. We also ask that you enjoy the food out there, not back in here, just so that we keep the area free of fragrance and aromas. But anyway, Max, we're so thrilled, and thank you for coming. And thank everyone for coming.
I'm not going to be facing you guys most of the time. Most of the time, I'm going to be looking at my paintings and talking about them, or looking at my painting that I'm going to be demoing and talking about that. But now I just want to turn around to say hello and thank you very much for inviting me and for this nice audience to perform before. At any rate, anyhow, you guys have said nice things about me, and it's very nice. I appreciate it. I didn't hear all of it because my hearing isn't so good. Maybe that's good, I'm not sure. You know, but I think she was saying a lot of nice things. And then the danger is that I might just get a swell head, and I don't want to do that. At any rate, if you have any questions at any time, I'd be happy to answer them. Okay, now I'm going to start off by talking about my work. So we're going to show slides, and I'll talk about the paintings in general, and I think that'll say a lot. And then after that, there'll be a break and then I'll be painting a model from life. Okay. And I think that the image I'll be painting over there on my French easel will be shown over here on the screen. Now over there, there's a bunch of paintings, sketches that I made that I usually display at workshops and such. And you're welcome to take a look, ask me any questions about them. But I just want to say something that's not very nice. They're for sale. I don't want to get commercial, or talk about terrible things like that. But I just want you to know that they're for sale. The prices are in the back of each one. Anyhow, take a look, and then we'll take it from there. Do you have any questions? Okay, so then I'll get started. I thought this was going to be at 7 o'clock for some reason. I don't know why. That's why I came like a little before 5. And then they told me it was 5 o'clock. Okay. Now, can you hear me all right? Okay. So this is the first of a group of paintings that I'm showing. And I call myself, or I try to think of myself as a social realist. In other words, when I'm painting, I'm not just painting a painting, but I'm trying to paint about humanity as I see it. In other words, those are the ideas I'm expressing. The painting itself, the circles, the squares, the technical aspects of it, I appreciate, but the bottom line is the power of your expression, my opinion. So anyhow, I started this, and some of these paintings that I paint are from life, and some are from photographs. And the reason that they're from photographs is because it often gives me a more candid view of what people are like, of their gestures, their looks, and so on. When I paint from life, the best that I have is an actor posing, where I'm trying to get the feeling that I'm interested in doing. And I know that many people value painting from life more than painting from a photograph. But I feel that there's a certain realism or reality that I can get from the photograph that I cannot always get just when the person is posing. And this includes many ideas and many situations that people are not going to pose. Or, for example, here is a painting about this homeless guy. I don't think I'd be able to get that whole setup into my studio. And I'm not very comfortable just painting in the street. So I feel, so in this case, I saw this fellow and I took a photograph and painted it from that. Now, in a way, this is more of a still life because you hardly see the person. All you see are his feet, and his head is leaning over on his belongings, and it's covered. But that's part of the unfortunate reality in life. They say that art is comedy and tragedy. Well, I feel that tragedy is something that we shouldn't just sweep under the rug, but we should see it as it is. Somebody said truth is beauty. And I think the act of telling the truth is more beautiful than only saying what's nice or even lying. So I'm giving you my point of view, but I have a feeling you knew that beforehand. This is a situation near where I used to live in New York City. It's behind the subway station on 72nd Street and Broadway. Some of you probably know that area. So here was this guy with his stuff out and his legs are showing, and I thought it would make an interesting painting. So that's how I did it. Happened to be in the winter. And of course, in the process, I'm trying to make a composition out of it. So it's well composed and has the kind of lights and darks and all of that. And also the reality of the painting. Now, when I paint, I'm looking at form. And I find that the form that I'm seeing is what I'm trying to get on my canvas. I sometimes I do exaggerate and change things, but usually I try to get the image as much as possible to what I'm seeing, unless I'm making some other statement that I'm interested in explaining. But I feel that the art is really an expression of ideas, and I'm expressing what I feel I see in society. Now, the unfortunate quality of this is one thing that I believe exists, and that's unfortunate. But I still want to show it. The size of this painting, I forgot exactly the size, but I have a feeling it's about that size, maybe a few inches bigger. And it's on canvas, on stretch canvas. You want to go on to the next one? All right, now here is another painting, also another tragedy in our society. You know, when people beg, I feel they demean themselves. Sometimes they have no other choice, or they feel they just have to. Sometimes people demean themselves, but they're proud of it. Like when you make a deal, a business deal. In a way, you're sometimes demeaning yourself, but that's my opinion. You don't have to agree with everything I say. And I feel in this case, this fellow, I assume, was blind, but you never know. And he acted like he was blind, and he had a kind of interesting debonair quality about him. The way he's holding his cup and a cigarette, you know, a little unbecoming a beggar. Uh, but anyhow, I came closer to him and he didn't move. You know, usually when you come close to somebody with a camera, they move. But this guy was still. Maybe he was really blind, or he was just a good actor. At any rate, this is also in that area near Broadway somewhere. So I felt it was an interesting composition, just the way he looked, his deformity, and all the things on him, about him. He was leaning against a wall, but I decided to paint in a store window with a reflection. So it gave a little bit of another dimension. I want to say one other thing about photorealism. What I'm painting is not photorealism. If you ask a photorealist what they're painting, they'll usually tell you they're painting the photograph. But I'm using the photograph as reference in order to express the idea or the feeling that I have when I see these things. So that's a big difference. Sometimes I'll paint from life and also use photo references, and I feel that works sometimes well with what I'm doing. Okay, you want to go on? Now, here's a case where a model posed for me from life. So I want them to to pose as a beggar. So here you have this guy, and he's smiling. And I got the idea from a Japanese woodcut where the beggar was smiling and there were some rich men scowling. But instead of painting the rich men, I'm assuming that's the audience, us. And here this guy is smiling. Now, in terms of the model and painting somebody smiling, it's difficult to hold a pose like that. But this guy held that pose smiling. Now he has his shirt off, and it reminded me of many of the old master paintings in the Renaissance, where the people were thin and bony. And I feel that kind of worked in this situation. I also use this as a method of teaching to talk about the drawing of the subject, to getting the gesture, and also to getting tones and color. For example, the transparency of things, even in the shade. See, so that becomes a question of seeing how to paint, how to mix the colors to get the shading and things I want. And again, if you have any question, just ask. Okay, want to go on? Now, sometimes I want to paint a group composition. So in this case, it was a bus stop. So I call it bus stop. And one of the characteristics I find when you get a multitude of people, especially in and around New York, is that you get a picture of America. And a picture of America are people from different backgrounds all over the world. And to me, that is the beauty of America, like the Statue of Liberty implies. And it was written, give me your poor, huddled masses yearning to be free. That's a beautiful thought, especially in today's world where a lot of people talk about how horrible immigrants are, how they're thieves, rapists, and so on. And I think that this is very American. This is the beauty of America to me. Now, I'm saying these things because I'm hoping to tell you what I'm expressing here. I'm sure many of you get the idea, but you may not think of it exactly as I was. So here, what I had is a variety of people. Some are Black, some are Hispanic, some are others. My wife is the one with the yellow hat and the pink shirt. And she had difficulty standing, but she stood there for me. And I didn't paint this on the street. I painted this in my studio. So she posed for me. And as at a bus stop, you take out your Metro card because the bus is coming and you got to be ready to pay. Right next to her is one of my former students. He's holding his daughter. Some of you may know of him. His name is Ricky Mojica. He now teaches at the Art Students League, and he was my student when I taught at the High School of Art and Design. So here he is holding his daughter, and you can see his likeness over there, and he and his daughter are looking at the bus coming. Of course, I didn't know if they were looking at it. I said to them, look that way, make believe there's a bus coming. And And then, of course, you have other people around, all taking different kinds of poses to make it look interesting and real. For example, the guy on the left side with the white shirt and the cigarette in his mouth. He was a worker in my studio building. So I asked him to pose as if he too was waiting for a bus, but he's in the street. And I think I captured there the feeling of this guy, and also that he is one of the many immigrant types from Mexico or some other Latin American country that shows me the beauty of the population we live with. Then I found it interesting once I saw a woman drinking coffee waiting for a bus. So you see, I had that woman posing. She was a professional model in the yellow dress, and she's drinking coffee. So when I'm trying to compose the pictures, I'm thinking of things that would be of interest and be characteristic for the situation. Uh, Now, everybody in this painting posed for me in my studio from life, but they didn't pose together. They posed one at a time. But the idea is to paint it as if they're all assembled for the situation. Now, I'm assuming this is the way the old masters painted. When they did group paintings, I don't think they had everybody standing in front of them. They painted them one or two at a time and try to get it to look right in that situation. It's a question of getting space, in terms of the composition to get a feeling of depth and atmosphere. Now, part of it is to paint the figures realistically with light and shade. And the other is to get certain shadows, cast shadows. And you see the way the shadows are falling along the sidewalk. Well, that gives you a feeling of perspective and space. And that is important to me because when I say I'm a social realist, I feel that the realist part is to be able to paint the realism like you say it, or like I would see it in real life. Then I wanted to put in a background that would relate to the subject. Now, this happens to be around 96th near Broadway, and there really is a bus stop there. And those buildings behind them are actually in that location. So in this case, I did take some photographs of the buildings with my cell phone. And that's how I got that background. But sometimes I might change things. I might make a shade here and there, or get it so that the important part of the picture are the people, and they would stand out in contrast to the buildings behind them. Or getting the texture. For example, the texture in the street with all the oil spills and the markings, or the texture on the sidewalk with that metal rim around the edge, which you all know about. Well, this is all a part of, getting the reality of that scene. And I think it makes it interesting, both from a social point of view, as well as a technical painting aspect. Because after all, I'm just trying to really do a good painting. Now, people usually came in the clothes they were wearing. And if they were coming dressed up, I would say, put on the clothes that you would normally wear, because I want that aspect of reality. I don't want to have a dress up makeup kind of look. But sometimes people are wearing things that are not right for the situation. If somebody came along in a tuxedo, wouldn't exactly look right. So anyhow, that's this painting, and it's called Bus Stop. Okay, you want to go to the next one? Now, this is a painting that I painted of people posing in my studio, but to look like a subway scene. Usually, when I'm in the subway, I'll sketch and I'll get ideas of how people look sitting in the subway. But these are models, or you might say actors, acting like I'm asking them to pose as if they're sitting in the subway. Of course, half the time they're sitting there, they're just being quiet, so they're thinking their own thoughts, and that's about the way it would look like if you're in the subway. The fellow on the left, I had him looking down to make for the pose. Pose would be a little more interesting. And of course, I would have lighting on them so that you can see clearly their form and the way their expression, both in face and body, is. See, and this becomes important. Again, there is a question of light and shade. The shade on the man's face and the light. See, it kind of looks very interesting. It spotlights him, and the shade around it on the interior of the train contrasts. So you look for light and dark contrasts. I hope this doesn't sound too much like an art lesson. But I want to tell you, I'm very impressed with the work I see around here. Really, in this room, the other room, I'm very impressed. Impressed. Really, very good paintings. I'm assuming it's by some of you guys here. Yeah. Now, the shading might vary at times because, in the subway, you get light coming down from various directions. So, for example, the shade on the guy's face is rather opaque and dramatic. But on the girl's face with the pink hat, it's a little softer. You see, and I think it made the whole thing look better that way. Another thing that I'm dealing with is texture, to try to get the feeling of the texture of things. Now, one of the textures are the plastic seats on the subway. So just by observing the way those things look, you can get that feeling, that shiny feel of that texture and the colors. I did, in fact, take some photographs with my cell phone of those seats so I'd see the way they look. I didn't photograph the people in those seats. They were posing in my studio. But I just try to get it so it looks natural the way they were sitting, and in the subway seats. And the woman on the right is a professional model who I have often used. And she was knitting. And I once saw somebody knitting. So I had her sitting on the train knitting like that. Now, another bit of the texture, as for example, the windows. You get the feeling that there are windows there and that you see things through the window. So you see the interior of the subway. And to get that feeling, I thought is important. Now, just from an artistic point of view, I feel the difference in the texture in the windows as opposed to the train interior makes the whole thing more interesting. And the same thing is true for the variations of the people. But that also makes it more human and more like it really is in America, specifically in the subway. The texture of her bag, so you can see it's leather. So all that becomes important. Well, how do you get the feeling of leather or the feeling of a shiny plastic seat or the metallic look of a interior wall on a train or the window? It's really by painting the forms that you see. You can't make these things up. Now I'm talking like a teacher. But that's what I tell the students. Paint what you see. My father, who was an artist, used to tell me, paint what you see, not what you know. And when he went to the National Academy of Design, he had a teacher, Charles Hawthorne. Some of you may have heard of him, who kept saying that all the time. Paint what you see, not what you heard. Now, I didn't know that Charles Hawthorne told him that. But one time, after saying it many times in my high school class, a student came to me and said she was reading a book by Charles Hawthorne. And he said that all the time. So then I knew where it came from. Now, you all know about Charles Hawthorne. He actually became an Ashcan school painter. I like the statement they made. I'm not crazy about the paintings he did, because as much as I enjoy the Ashcan school in terms of them trying to paint reality, not just the pompous portraiture scenes that they were critical of, but in terms of doing that, they also became a little bit more modern and began to paint uh, forms of people in a more distorted and abstract way. So I was not very happy about that turn of the Ashcan school, but I did appreciate their attitude about seeing the reality of life in terms of the subject. Okay, you want to change? Okay, here's one of my mentors. Okay, here is my subway scene, 19th century. So I felt, after seeing Daumier, that, hey, look, this is my subway. These are my people riding the third-class carriage. So I became inspired. Now, you see, in Daumier, not only did I enjoy the subject that he painted, but also the way he composed it. I tend to try to paint more realistically in form, but Daumier didn't. He was sort of looser, and from what I understand, he painted from sketches. He didn't have the models posing in front of him. That's what I heard. Okay, you want to change? All right, now this was a situation that I often saw in the subway. And to me, I felt that I wanted to reflect some of the insecurity that women, especially young women, often had in the subway. You know, being looked at and preyed upon. So it's like I had this student pose for me sitting in my studio, but I put her on one of these subway platform benches. And I had her just posing. But the impression that I got is that she is trying to get into herself to avoid perhaps other stares and uncomfortable looks. So I guess in many ways, I was influenced by some of the feminist attitudes about life. And as a result, I have some of these other people around who are looking at her. Now, in this case, I had a guy posing over there for me. He was one of my students in high school. Some of you may have heard of him because he's a wonderful, realistic painter today, Stephen Assail. And he posed for me. He had reddish hair at that time. I didn't exactly get the best likeness of him, but he was posing for me there. I would often have students posing for me. Of course, he was older than when he was a student, but I felt that here I'm trying to get that kind of an expression. Okay, you want to go on? Now, trying to get a feeling of animation, of movement. Very often you see people having a conversation and they're very animated. As you know, I'm sure you all are. I'm even talking to you and I can't stop using my hands and turning around to you. So I had these three girls posing. They were students in my high school class. And I had them animated like they're having a conversation. Now I painted them. At first I started with three of them together. So I get the relationships. But then I painted them one at a time in order to develop the form. And again, the idea of texture and things like that enters the picture. So the floor of the subway had a certain kind of a dirty look, but then there's often newspapers scattered on the floor. But I thought it made for an interesting design, but also part of the reality of what you often see. Again, the way they're dressed is the way they would normally dress. Now, sometimes I might have an option and I would suggest one thing or another. If you look again, the texture, for example, of the hair, you see they all have hair that's a little different, but you feel the texture as well as the color of the hair. And again, in getting the color of the hair, which I'm sure many of you know, judging by the paintings I see around, that, for example, the girl whose hair is short and dirty blonde, the blonde hair is not yellow, but it's sort of an off brown mixed with a little green, etc., etc. But that gives the look of the blonde hair in that situation. I'm looking around here in the room and I see people with that color hair. And sometimes you would say that's yellow. Blonde is yellow, but it isn't. It's so affected by the lighting around it. The lighting on her hair, where you feel the hair is coming around, it has a kind of cool light. But you get the feel or the texture of a hair, which is relatively smooth. The same is true for the girl in the foreground, but it's a different color. So you see the color of the light of her hair is more of a cool gray, but that's brown hair. The other girl is partly black, and her hair is a little fuller in form. Now, in order to make this more of a real situation, like in the subway, I had this guy posing, have nothing to do with the girls, but like in the subway, you're sitting near other people without acknowledging them, without knowing them, but that's part of the scene in the subway. Now, sometimes I would do things for composition. For example, the pole coming down on the right side of the painting. That also gives me the feel of the subway. It also gives me a design in contrast to the girl's arm going off to the left. Okay, you want to go next one? Okay, now this is a painting that I painted of my parents. This guy is the guy who told me, paint what you see, not what you know. But over here, he's an old man. Of course, I was middle-aged at this time. So that's my father. And my mother is holding his arm And she's, looking ahead and standing almost like she's leading the way. And she usually did in all respects, except when it came to painting. So then he was totally in control of what he was doing. But he was a little stronger, but he was already starting to go blind. As an old man, an artist, and he couldn't see that well. So my mother could still see, and she led the way. She was a little paranoid, so she hid her pocketbook under her bag. After all, you go in the subway, you got to be careful. Now, one of the things that I find most endearing to me is the way they looked. I don't know if you guys ever heard the word shtetl people. Some of you may not. I guess none of you. That's a Jewish word for, people who lived in the shtetls, in sort of little Jewish villages, who could not live with the majority of the people in Russia, in Tsarist Russia, Eastern Europe. They came from the Ukraine, but they came to this country in 1912 and 1920. But as they got older, they still had this look of these, rather small Jews from Eastern Europe. And when I when I speak about it, I get choked up. Okay, want to change? Okay, now here is an example of a photograph I took to do a painting. I wanted to get to see the way people really look in real life. So here is right in the front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And here are these people in the front having lunch, and the other people are around. Well, I decided to paint them, just these two, without the others. Can you change? So here is the painting, and I entitle it Lunch at the Met. I feel there's a little humor in that, but that's, what it is. Nothing fancy, but sort of it sounds like it could be fancy. At the same time, I wanted to get what I thought was so beautiful that I said earlier about America. People from all over. And you see, there are characteristics in the way they are sitting and eating that you can get from candid snapshots. For example, the woman who is eating and she has her pinky up, as she's eating her sandwich or whatever. You can see they're not posing. Or the guy, the way his feet are down and his shoes are coming together, the soles of them. That's a candid look of the way people look. Now, at the same time, I'm painting a lot of other candid characteristics. For example, the man somehow looks like he's, from India, something of that sort. His skin is darker than the woman who you would obviously call black. So you see these kind of differences that don't fall into the stereotype all the time. And then it becomes a matter of painting the form, their form, so it has that look. Like he has a skinnier look. She is a little heavier, and you get those qualities in the people. And to me, that is beautiful when you get the characteristics of people as they really are. Okay, and in contrast, there are the steps. See, and that's concrete, of course. Okay, you want to change? Now, here is another figure composition. Okay, just to let you know, I put myself into these paintings sometimes. You see the guy coming up out of the subway? That's me. Of course, that's me some time ago. You see where my hairline is now? See, over there, I had a little more hair, but I was still getting a pretty high forehead. And here I am coming up out of the subway. That's a subway at 79th and Broadway. I lived on the Upper West Side for a while, so that's why I did a lot of paintings around there. And that's a newsstand on the southwest, on the southeast corner of Broadway and 79th. Now, here I had a lot of people posing based on sketches that I did, but I had them posing in situations. For example, the guy on roller skates. He was one of my students at Art and Design. He was the same guy who was holding his daughter at a later time on the bus stop. But here he's a little younger and he's on roller skates. He was a very good roller skater. And then you had other students who were around, like the fellow kneeling, tying his shoelaces. And the three girls were students, and one is reaching out like in a conversation. Or I had a friend of mine pose as if he's the newsstand dealer. See, he's got that Discover the Voice on him. They had those aprons at that time. And so I have a number of different people. Some are models, and some were people I knew. The woman on the right was an English teacher in the high school I taught at. And if you know Broadway, this is on 79th. So 2.5 blocks up across the street is Zabar's. I'm sure some of you people have been there. And again, like I mentioned earlier, I'm getting a feeling of space and depth. See, and to me, that's important. It isn't just the rendering of the figures, but it's a feeling of getting space. So the cast shadows help. And you notice, because my eye level is about the level of, let's say, the shoulders or the head of people, we're looking down at the sidewalk. So the way the feet are higher on the surface, because that's part of the, that's my poster, that's okay. That's part of the perspective. Now, of course, as you look up, the perspective is going the other way. So the tops of the building and the windows, the vanishing point of the perspective is going in the other direction and converging, as you know, to vanishing points. Now, in each one, did I say something wrong? Now, in each one, in each situation, you see their clothing varies, but it looks natural. And you get different kinds of textures, whether it's jeans, sort of a nylon or silky jacket, a woolen, coat, the hat the guy's wearing, the red hat the woman's wearing, and so on. They all vary. And you get the wood with the posters on the side. See, all that becomes part of the scene. Even the newspapers on the ground. See, that's painted there. And I had the guy, his knapsack over it. So it becomes all part of that composition. Okay, want to go on? Another subway. Now, this one is a 72nd Street of Broadway. And here I'm looking at the front of the building. This actually looks a little washed out. See, some of the darker parts, I think, were a little richer. So I'll blame it on the photography. That's a cute trick. If you think you did something wrong, blame it on the photography. Yeah. And again, I use people I know and students and so on. But to do these, the newspapers, for example, I would take bundles into my studio. So I'd really be painting from the real thing. Okay, you want to go on? Okay, this is another newsstand. So I'm figuring out different angles of how people look around the newsstand. Some of these are people who are my students. Some of them are people who bought my paintings, like the guy in the hard hat. He was really a lawyer, not a hard hat, but I asked him to put on the hard hat. And here he is reading the New York Times. Okay, notice nobody has had any cell phones. So this was painted a while ago. Okay. Okay, you want to go on?
John Lennon in there?
What?
Is that John Lennon up there?
John Lennon? Who?
John Lennon, the Beatle, with the next to the hard hat.
I don't know which one you mean.
I know the student. This thing being near the Dakota, maybe John Lennon.
Oh, no. He was a student in my high school class. And then he went into commercial art.
There you go.
Yeah. But you can see also the way I'm painting the papers, especially these bundles of papers in the front. You know, you take them into your studio. The lady in the yellow dress, she was a friend of mine. The woman in the green was a model, professional model. In fact, she was the one who posed in that subway painting, knitting. The guy who's reaching over to get a paper, young guy in blue, his father, I had him pose as the newsstand man, the newsman. So that's what that's all about. Otherwise, I'll be repeating the same things. What?
Max, were you doing full-time teaching at that point?
Well, at this point, yeah, I was teaching a long time. I taught at the high school for 22 years, 1960 to 1982. And then I taught at the high school, at the School of Visual Arts from 1983 to, when was it now? 2000, 2004. And then I started at the Art Students League later. So I was always teaching. I felt teaching is an important part of being an artist because a lot of people want to learn how to paint. And this way, I give them my point of view. You okay?
Minutes before break.
What?
Presentation.
Oh, yeah?
To take a break.
Okay. John is my friend. He's letting me know about time. Okay. Okay, you want to go on? Okay, this is not by one of my students. But the reason I'm showing this is because I feel the drawing is weak. This may sound arrogant, but if you feel that an old master has made mistakes, say what you feel. Now, probably in the case of the older masters, this wouldn't be the case because they didn't make these kind of mistakes. But in the case of the French Impressionists and later, they did. Their drawing was rather sloppy. Now, you might say this is my point of view, but this is my point of view, right? I think I still have the First Amendment. Do I? Okay. All right. However, the subject and the expression that he got is what I really feel strongly about, and that is beautiful. Okay, you want to go on?
Could you point out what you consider weak?
What was that?
Could you just point out what exactly you considered weak?
Okay, you want to go back? Well, you see how the arm lacks a certain amount of fullness. You know, it's a little bit sharp on the edge and it would have a bit more of a turn. Although he did try to make it a little bit, but it's a little bit too simplified. You get the feeling that it's not as real as I think it should be. Uh, this is true for other parts of her also.
Matt, who did this?
What was that?
Who is the artist?
Degas. Now he did a lot of beautiful paintings, ballet, dances, and so on. Okay, you want to go on? Okay, here's another one of my tragedies. This has to do with foreclosure. The idea that human life is not as important as real estate interests. So I have that sign, foreclosure. The furniture is out in the street, and I have people posing as if they're, upset, obviously. Now, some of you guys may disagree with me. Maybe some of you are real estate people. I don't know. But I feel that human life is more important than paying a high rent and you can't, or than losing your mortgage and you're out in the street. Now, in this case, I didn't ask them to wear what they would normally wear, but I made a point, a situation. For example, I had this fella here who used to be a student of mine at Art and Design, but then later on, he was working at the UN and other places. And the way he looked like he could have been a businessman. So here I had him with a shirt and tie, and he's lost his home. So I want to show how he's suffering. So I asked him to cry. So he made believe that he's crying. The little girl is my granddaughter. Now she's about 20 years old, but then she was 9. And here he's got his arm around her, comforting her, and she's holding on to her bunny for security. All these things add to the expression. So it's the subject and the idea that comes across that, for me anyhow, is very important. She also has a certain look in her face. Now, I'm sure that she was not worrying about the loss of her home because it wasn't happening. But I just asked her to pose. But she had a little bit of a bewildered look, so I felt it worked. Now, the other people are grieving. You can see the normal grieving situation. The woman who was breastfeeding was a model who had been posing for me at times, and she had a baby. So I asked her to pose nursing the baby, even though she lost the home. And all the furniture around is sort of strewn around. Now, to do that, I photographed a lot of my own furniture and just drew it into the composition haphazardly. See, and then painted it like I had seen it when it was already all set up. You notice on the lower left, there is a French easel. That's my French easel. It's not the one I have now, that's an older one, but that's my French easel. So I'm just letting you know how, this whole thing came together. Now, I happened to put in, I could have had some apartment in the city, but I wanted to symbolize the idea of a regular, middle class home, the usual kind of house that you might have in Ridgewood or other places. It's a private home. Okay, and you lose it. Okay, want to go on? Now this is uh, a photograph. This is from a photograph I took behind the Museum of Natural History and the planetarium on Columbus Avenue. This woman was walking along with her helper, and I felt it was an interesting situation. And as usual, the helpers were usually women of color. And the woman actually reminded me of my mother because I felt she had a similar look, and I felt that she was trying to look together when she was really beginning to fall apart. So, that attempt at trying to look okay is a part of the natural scene of people. And this is what I felt in painting this. So while she had her nanny, those little babies had theirs. And again, they're people of color, usually Hispanic. See, and then I would put them in this composition where I had the darker background, so the figures stood out in contrast. So I'm going into some of the compositional attitudes I have. And again, the little figures in the background, as you go uptown nearer to 81st Street, you begin to see smaller figures. Okay, you want to change? Okay, another painting from a photograph. Did any of you ever try and sketch or paint children in a playground? You never did. Okay, well, you got to be careful, especially if you look like me, because they think you're a pervert. So here's the way to do it. You got to be devious. Make believe you're photographing a squirrel in a tree, and then quickly swoop down and get the kids. Or better still, bring a decoy. You see the woman in the pink shirt with the dark-haired kid she's caring for? She was a friend, and she was a nanny to the kids of my neighbor. So she went into the park, and I went with her. So I was photographing her. So everybody thought, well, this is natural. Okay. So if you go home and your mother asks you, what'd you learn today? How to be devious. Okay. Now, there's also involved here some wonderful textural effects. For example, the painting of a sand, whether it's in the sandbox or on top of the ledge of the sandbox. The texture, again, the textural effects of the hair of the little girl, the hair of the nanny, and the others. You see, and even the pants. So they all have different feelings. Now, for example, the little girl's arms. You see how you have that feeling of a little girl where the skin and the limbs are tender, as opposed to the nanny who's a little older. So it's a little bit different. I don't know if I have it here, but later on, if I have it, I'll show you a painting I did of my wife when she's old, and you see her arms. Okay.
How long would a painting like that take you?
I don't know, a couple of weeks. It depends. Sometimes you do it in shorter time. Sometimes it takes longer. It depends what other things you're doing. It depends how often you have to go and teach. Okay, you want to change? Okay, now this is 3-card Monte. I think you all know about 3-card Monte, don't you? Okay, so that game is not legal because it's gambling in the street. So what the guys would do when they play 3-card Monte is they would deal the cards, people would come around, and then they would have lookouts. You see the fellow on the left who looks Jamaican with a yellow hat? He's looking out for the police on that side. And the fellow behind the card dealer with a shorter haircut and a band, he's looking out for the police on the other side. And to see the fellow with the radio and the afro, that's my former student, Ricky, again. Boy, did I use him a lot. And so on and so forth. You have, most of these are students. But the woman on the far left with a kerchief on, that's my wife. So you can see, you know, that was done when I was middle-aged. Okay, now she looks older. Because she's in that subway painting, or not subway, in the painting of the bus stop with the yellow hat. Yeah. See over there, she's old.
I see a pickpocket.
Yeah. Now I put as a setting here the background of Central Park. You know, some of you have been around the mall and you may have seen that. Okay, you're trying to tell me it's time.
Yeah. So we have time for one more because they have to break for food. So if you want
Oh.
to maybe pick one more,
Yeah, how many more are there? I didn't get onto the illustrations yet.
there's a lot more.
Okay, I'll come.
But they have to take the break.
Oh, okay, all
So
right.
if you want to do one more.
Okay, we'll do one more. I understand that there's a break and they're telling me you're serving food. Okay, so I'll have to stop. So eat fast and then come back, or bring your food back here and I'll talk while you're eating. Okay, what I think I'll do, can you hear me all right? All right, what I think I'll do is do basically a head study down to her hair, bottom of her hair. And somebody is going to get me some ultramarine blue. I thought I had it, but I didn't. Now what I have here is my color palette arrangement. And it's essentially Mars black, ultramarine blue, a cerulean blue, viridian green, cinnabar green medium, cadmium green light, burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, alizarin crimson, cadmium red light. Oh, thanks. Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'll do it.
Yep.
Hold on. I want to put down some paint. You got that?
Yeah.
This is pretty hard.
Do you want this instead, sir? Did you want this instead? It might be a little more.
Oh, is it? Is that better?
Yes, I believe so.
Boy, you guys come prepared.
It's actually from Rebecca.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you very much. There you go.
You can hold on to it.
I don't need. I don't need. I don't need. Okay, and then I'm going to finish telling you the colors. Cadmium red light, cadmium orange, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, and titanium white. That's it. And in the cups, I have terpenoid, and then I have linseed oil. Okay, now I use the terpenoid for washing my brushes every time I want to mix a different color. The oil is to spread the paint on more easily when I'm painting a larger area or I want to paint it thin but still keep a certain amount of body. Now, I usually like to use larger brushes to begin with so that I don't get bogged down in detail. I look for the main form first. So, and usually I'll start with a darker color. So, for example, I'm getting a little of the burnt umber. That's the dark brown. And then I'm thinning it with turp. I just want to fix the angle of my easel. And then the next thing I'm going to do is decide the design of how I'm going to do the painting. I'm figuring her head will be something in this area here. See, and then I'm going to have her hair come down to about here. Now, I'm not always sure of my proportions, so I measure. So I'm measuring by holding my arm out straight and putting the top of the handle about where I see the hair on top, and then my finger where the chin is. And then from the chin down, it's a little below where I'd have the hairline, which will be about here. So I'm going to see how that works out. Yeah, that's not so bad, but I think I'll make the head just a little bit smaller. Hey, John, do you have any paper towels? You have paper towels? Maybe
No,
they
but
have paper towels.
I'll get some for you.
They probably have some. So now you see, I'm looking at the general shape. Oh, thanks. And I'm trying to, first of all, I look for the proportions. So I want to see that the width of the head is the right size in relation to the chin up to the top. So I'm going to measure that to be sure. And it's a little bit less than the top. So I'm measuring this distance across. And that looks about right. So, what I suggest is just to be sure, it's a good thing to measure, although the main thing is your instinct. And that probably tells you what you need to know. But sometimes you don't always get it exactly right. So you want to have a little help. Now then I'm going to look for the center of the face in perspective. So you see, I see the center of the face more or less along these lines, so that I know the nose is going to be about here, and the eyes about here. See, and then there's the mouth position. Now I'm indicating the general shape of the eye. Now I want you to notice I'm not starting with the eyeball or the eyelashes, but I'm looking for the basic larger shapes. Of course, I say that to be funny, but also it's very important because I think very often people look at the details and then the problem is that they get the total out of proportion. Now over here, there's a dark on the corner of the eye near to the nose. So I just put that general dark in. Now the whole process is to keep correcting as you go. Now here I'm putting in the side of the face, going into the neck. In other words, I want to get my basic shape in place. Also, what I often try to do is if I'm painting a head that is more or less looking in one direction, I try to have more space in the front of the head than the back. Unless there is a particular reason that you want a different kind of a composition. But usually that to me is more comfortable. Now here I'm looking at her neck and I'm seeing that it's a certain size. I'm going to measure the distance from the pit of the neck to her chin and see how that compares from her chin up. It's about from the chin up to about the middle of the eye. So then I'll come down here. So then I see that the neck is going to be almost that long. And I feel that the hairline seems to come out over there. You know what? My father told me a big artist uses a big brush. So I'm going to get a bigger brush. Did you ever hear that before? See, it's especially good when you're blocking in large areas. And now, once I get these larger areas in, I just want to get a rough idea of the shades. For example, the neck is in a bit of a shade. The side of the face here is in a bit of a shade also. Now, the basic proportions are really the most important part of the painting, or in other words, the drawing. So it's those basic shapes that are important. Now, when I say shapes, I don't mean the shapes of features. I mean the shapes of lights and darks, because it's the lights and darks that gives you the feeling of form. Now, once I have this in with my various darks, I'll then start using color to get my darks and lights. So now I'm going to start using darks and lights with color. Now, whenever I see darks, it's always muted. Darks are never bright colors. Even in the red robe that she's wearing, the darks are not bright colors like the lights in the robe. And the same thing is true for the face and the hair. So I'm using the burnt umber, and I'm going to try some of the viridian green. So I'm using cool and warm. I might make some of that a little darker. So I'm going to get some ultramarine blue and some of the brown. See, so over here, for example, there's a pretty dark spot. Now over here, I'm looking at the shade because I'm looking at darks and lights. So in general, the face is more light. The darks are over here, so I'm going to get a muted color. So whenever you paint skin, at least when I do, I'm looking at the various colors that I would use for the skin or for that particular shade. And it's usually mixed cool and warm. So in this case, I'll even use a little bit of the of the cadmium red light and some of the viridian green. So you can get that tone across. Now that tone is very similar to the hair. Now there may be parts of the hair that have some darker areas, so I'm using burnt umber. So over here, there's a dark for where that is, and over here I already put one in. Here the color is a little more mellow, so I'm using burnt sienna and a touch of white. And I see it comes down here about the level of the bottom of the nose to the mouth. Now I also feel that the lights in the hair are basically darker than most of the face. So here it's even darker, and here it is too. But I want to be sure of the shape. So from about the level of the chin, you see when I put this in, I just don't put it in. I look at it always in relation to something else. And then it seems to have a little bit of a redder flow. So I'm mixing that with the red. So it becomes sort of a reddish brown. Okay, over here it's even more so. But before I get to that, I would rather put the darks in first. So this dark starts below the shade under the neck. Again, I'm looking at the relationships. Now there's a nice reddish glow here to the hair, but it's not red like the like her coat. So first I'm taking burnt sienna, a touch of the cadmium red and white, and I'll put it down to see if it works. I think it's lighter. Now you see this looks lighter, but I don't think it's really lighter than that. So what I really have to do is put something behind here that will make it look lighter. Okay, everything is relative. So in the background, I've got a sort of a cool color. So I'm using green and blue. See, now when I put that in over there, then suddenly this looks lighter. And as you go up here, it seems to get a little more faded, more medium toned. And I'm going to put it around this side also. And over here, the color is, what's that?
It's 20.
Is that time?
Yes. 20 minutes.
Oh, 20 minutes. Hold on, I'm just another minute. I'm going to put in this tone over here. See, so this is just a smidgen lighter than the hair itself. Okay, take a rest. Okay, now, I'm sure you guys have a million questions. Nobody?
What is your surface, the grounds that you're using?
Oh, this is masonite. That's compressed wood. You get it in the lumber yard. And then what I usually do is I get a sheet, which is about, hey, John, what is the sheet? 9 feet by 12 or what? Are you there, John?
Yes.
What is the size of the sheet we get in a lumber yard?
Oh, it's a 4 by 8.
Oh, 4 by 8 feet. And then I'll have the lumber yard cut it up for the sizes I want to paint on. So this happens to be 11 by 14. Anyhow, that's the masonite, compressed wood. But then once you get that, you sand it and then put gesso on.
What?
And you do that a couple of times. Sand it, sand it, and gesso. And then you'll have a better surface to paint on. So when you put the paint down, it doesn't absorb the paint, but it stays more on the surface. Now, if you don't want to go to the lumber yard, you can go to an art store and they have what they call gesso boards. Okay, and that is gessoed. It's not toned though. I often like to tone it, so it's not exactly a white surface. But I've used the gesso board also, where it has a white surface. So anyhow, in answer to your question, that's what this is. Yeah. What do I tone it with? Any slightly dark color and terp. So it's a thin coat. And so it's really transparent. The gesso is what binds the surface so that your paint does not sink in. You know, when the paint sinks into the surface, it doesn't keep that richer color. Even then, it doesn't always keep it exactly. So that's why many artists will varnish their paintings when they're done or almost done.
Do you varnish your painting?
What?
Do you varnish your painting?
Yeah, I usually do.
What do you use?
I would use
Retouch varnish.
yeah, retouch varnish, and but I would do that only when I think the paint is starting to dry a little bit, because the paint is not thoroughly dry, and if you use a final coat of varnish, you're going to get cracks in the painting, because the paint underneath may not be thoroughly dry, and the varnish is drying faster. So the air is rushing to the surface and creating cracks. So that's why I use retouch varnish. After several months and you've finished the painting, then you can put on a final coat. So that's the story about the varnish. Some people use other materials, other mediums, to try to get that richer, uh, more brighter, richer color on the surface, so it doesn't look washed out. So what else? Well, if you have any more questions, just ask.
Everybody's got about 30 seconds.
Now, of course, you know that my style of painting is alla prima, so I'm painting more directly. A little like you can imagine Sargent would have been painting. But many of the old masters worked in a more academic style, which they do in many of the academies now, where they work much more academically with a careful drawing, and they don't start painting until they have a pretty much of a finished drawing in pencil or some kind of drawing. But I like to work more directly with the paint because no matter which way you go, you're still correcting your drawing as you go. And this is the way I learned.
Okay, you're back on.
What?
20 minutes.
Okay. Now I can continue this over here, around here, but that tone back there, see, helps me. So the main thing I want to do is to get a brighter color for her skin tones. So to do that, first of all, I'm going to wash my brush. I don't use a different brush for every color. So I'm using the cadmium red light and white. If I put that down, it looks too pink. So I'm going to use a cool color to neutralize that pink, to tone that intensity down. So I'm using the cadmium green, which is a somewhat neutral color. It's cool and it's light. See, and that's a little more in keeping with what I need. Now, I'm also, see, I already have these tones in, but I'll go over that too. So I see a spot of light for the nose, and then it seems to go into the cheek. Now here I'm using a variety of grays. I went into some of the brown and some of the cooler grays. See, of course, down there, it seems to get a little darker, but that's not dark enough. So I'm going into more of that color, see, which I've used for other things. So now I begin to get that form for the turning of the cheek, going up into the light of the cheek. And then I see also a tone here, but that's too dark. So I'm going to use the white. Tone it down. See, so I begin to get a different tone in there. Now the eye area, see, is darker. So I'm washing the brush and I want to get a darker tone for that eye. Again, I'm not working into the eyelashes or the eyeballs. So what I'll do there, I'll use, let's say, burnt sienna. The cinnabar green medium, that's the medium green. See, and just put in a tone. So the tone will be a little darker than the lights, but not as dark as the hair. I may want to see how it looks a little darker. So I'm using some of the Viridian to mix into this. So that becomes a little darker. See in the corner of the eye or over on the side. Now then over here in the where the nose is, I've also got a dark, but that seems to be not as dark going down into the lower cheek. So I'm going to try some of the green, light green, and some of the reds and pinks. So you can come into that section down here. Now over here, it does get a little darker, so I'm comparing values. Okay, you see, it doesn't stand out that much from the hair. So I'm going to make that value a little darker so it's closer to the hair color. Now some of that same color comes into the shade of the neck, but it's more the area of the neck here. So over here, there's a darker tone, like there is underneath the jaw. So that's what I'm going to put over here. So here I've used the, I think, burnt sienna and the medium green. And sometimes I'll just take some kind of a value that I see on the palette without even mixing, because the main thing is to get my lights and darks. So underneath the bottom lip, there is a bit of a shade. Too red. So I'll take a little of the green and go over it. Okay, now the upper lip is a little dark, but it's not as dark as the shade under the nose. So I'm getting a little of the red here and subduing it with a cooler neutral. So I just see what I have right here. And then, of course, I know I'll come back to it. Now, you notice I'm staying with this big brush because I'm trying to be a big artist. Now, I think I want to put in a tone over here on the cheek. So I'm looking at this cheek and comparing it to the other side. So it does look like a little darker and more of a gray. Okay, that's too dark. Now that same tone seems to come from below the mouth here, across into the lower part of the cheek on the light side. Okay, I just use white together with some of the cadmium red light right on the palette. But now here I want to get a little darker, but I want to keep some of the redder tones in here. So I'm mixing this on my palette to get a slightly darker tone, but with some of the red. Some of that same tone is right up here in the temple. And then it seems to go into the section on the upper part of the eye, the muscle of the eye on the left side. Now here the dark comes under the chin and sort of comes up a little bit in the front so that there's a soft tone or soft curve between the bottom of the chin and the middle of the chin. Okay, that means I have to put a light in for the upper part of the chin, but the light, of course, is not as light as the cheek and the nose. So you see, I'm constantly comparing. Now here I'm getting the dark between the eyes and this part of the eye between the eyes. See, so it gets a little darker, but not as dark as the eye area itself. And see, with this big brush, I'm just indicating the general area where that eyeball is. See, and right away I begin to get a little expression. And here it's the same thing on this side, except over here the eyeball seems to go into a shade down to the right. So whatever it is, I'm constantly looking for the relationships. Okay, I'm going to go to a slightly smaller brush. This is a number 4. And it's a Raphael Paris Classic brush. Sometimes I use other brushes. Okay, the burnt umber and the viridian green. Now over here on the nose, it's a little darker on the right side than on the left. Now that may be a little too dark. So I'm going to come at it with a little bit of a redder color to influence that change. So I'm cutting down that side of the nose here because it's not as wide as I had it. So I'm constantly making corrections. See, now I use a little of that color over here because I feel the chin has to be a little more pronounced. And I think I want to make some of this lighter. Okay, the lower lip is light, but not as light as most of the cheek and other skin areas. So I'm using a little bit of the red, but subduing it in a cooler area. Now here, the side of the eye, it would not be so contrasting. So I'm going to get a sort of a mixed area there. So it's not as dark as that, but a little darker than the lights on the skin. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, I'm going to make it a little lighter yet. Now, I didn't wash my brush because I don't want to get rid of all of the color on there. See, the side of the nose where that nostril is in the light is not as dark as the other side. So I'm coming down with a medium tone. Okay, I'm using a smaller brush yet. See, for this part of the nose, Is that the break?
Break.
Okay, take a rest.
Great job, Michelle.
You got strong hands? Can you open it?
You know what I was gonna ask? Your tone canvas, do you have a preference why you wouldn't go more in the red tone as opposed to the greener tone? Is there a reason you might choose one
Oh,
or
you mean,
another?
you mean for this background?
Your toning of your canvas.
I didn't even do that. John did it for me.
Oh, he did, so you don't care. It's not
Okay.
because you want it to be warmer.
No,
It's-
it's more a matter of getting a bit of a darker tone. So you're not just working on a white surface. You see, if you work on a white surface,
No, I
the
understand.
lights don't look
I
like,
just wanted to know whether
Yeah.
you're choosing the greenish gray background as opposed to like a burnt sienna wash, which is
Mhm.
red.
When I took your workshops a number of years ago, you had us make these and gesso, sand, but then put a medium gray oil
yeah,
coat, sand, and another coat. So that was great. A lot of work.
yeah. No, I didn't do all that.
Yeah.
The other are
But it just if I have a tone, will go another hour or as long as you can stay. I mean, I don't want it to be past your bedtime.
All right.
Joel's got the timer. We're all set.
Okay, John, thanks. Okay, do you hear me? Okay, I'm going to start to develop the painting a little more now. So you see a slight light over there. And that also defines a little of the expression of the eye. Now there's a slight bit of the white of the eye. So you're not just in a corner, but it's not white because it's even darker than the skin tones in the light. So again, you have to paint what you see, not what you know is a certain color. Now over here, I see her jaw is a little narrower. So I'm going to make that, change the drawing there a little. And I see here, I see the shade becoming a little darker between the jaw and her hair. So there I'm going to use the burnt umber and some of the ultramarine blue. Now it's a little more refined than that. See, but I just used a heavy brush. Now I see the same shade is up here, starting above the hair and coming down to about that level. Top of the hair is a little lighter than the side. So I'm just getting a little white, but I'm getting a lighter shade of the brown just from what I see on the palette. Now, right at the edge there, it's a little softer, not a hard line. So you see I'm softening that edge. Now over here, there's a slightly lighter tone than these two darks. That's approximately where the ear is. I think I want to make it lighter than that. So I'll just go into a lighter red with a gray. I see the back of her jaw light over here, so it extends out a little bit. And there's a slight tone, mainly because the side of the nose is lighter. So the side of the nose is lighter, a bit redder, but over here you have a little bit of a light on the cheek. So I'm trying to get the value and the color. Now over here I see more of a mellow gray tone. I'm getting a touch of blue into that same tone because I want to come down this side of the eye. I see it should be a little lighter than that. So I'll pick up a little bit of a light and come up from the bottom. As I come around the forehead, it begins to slightly get a bit darker. But this part over here looks like it should be lighter. So I'm going to do that now. See, by using the paint a little thicker, I can get the light down. If it's too thin, it'll mix with the wet paint. A little bit of lightness in the corner of the nose here. Okay, I think I want to block in more of the neck, so I'll have a little more of the head in general. So that neck is more or less on the gray side. I use the red and I use the cinnabar green, but it seems to me that it's a little more blue. So I'm getting some blue and a touch of white. So now it'll be a little more like the tone I see. Maybe even a little bluer. And now I'm going to get the shading here to blend a little with the shade, with that lighter part of the next shade. Okay, I'm using this Escoda brush number 8. There's a slight light over there. And it seems like there's a similar light up on top at the top of the nose here. Over here is even a slight light on the lower lip. See, that gives that sort of fuller lip look. But the upper lip contrasts a little more. So I'm going to get some burnt sienna, make it slightly darker, and try and suggest that upper lip or the bottom of it that's a bit darker. Now the bottom of her eyelid is a little lighter than what I have there. So I'm getting a slightly light tone, and I'm making it a little cool. And on this side, you see it even more pronounced because of the darks around it. Now the dark over here of the eye is on the right side. And I started to do it before into that spot. So I'm going to start again. You see it's a little higher, the eyeball. I kind of like the strong jawline here that she has. So I'm going to define that a little better.
Okay.
Was the YouTube over? Okay. Thank you.